Morning. My name is Dave Branscome, and I am going to be talking to you about adventures in endpoint threat detection and how we can hunt for attackers on our network. This is me. I'm a Microsoft security architect. I'm based out of Raleigh, North Carolina. Been about 13 years with Microsoft, more than 20 in the industry. Had many roles in Microsoft. Right now I work with the partner organization supporting Microsoft partners. So if any of you are Microsoft partners, feel free to reach out to me. Got a bunch of certifications, and I love being at the beach. So I spend a lot of time at the Outer Banks. All right, so let's get into the presentation. So the problem that we're trying to resolve here is this. There are a lot of network defenses that go wrong before there's any contact with an adversary. And it starts with how defenders think of the battlefield. Most defenders focus on protecting their assets, putting them in some sort of a prioritized list, maybe sorting them by workload or by business function. And so effectively, defenders have this list of assets, maybe based on system management services or an asset inventory database, maybe a BCDR spreadsheet. There's one significant problem with that model. When an attacker breaches a network, they simply land somewhere in the overall graph of the network. And they could do that by using a technique that's as simple as phishing through an email. And so once they have that entry point, they can pivot and move laterally. They aren't following your list of defenses in any sequential order. They go wherever the graph gives them the ability to move, right? And so as defenders, for years, we've built defenses based on the model that, or on the theory that attackers will launch attacks in the order that we've prioritized our defenses. And usually that thinking has been that we would think the attackers are coming from the outside in. In reality, that isn't how it works at all. Attackers don't care where their entry to the network is. They only care that they get in. And once they get in, they can move wherever they need to go once they're inside. So how do we change the game here? We have to use tools that look at attacks from many different angles. Now, the techniques and tools that I'm going to be demoing are obviously Microsoft focused because that's the tool set I know best. But this is what most large organizations are using anyway. So there's some inherent value in understanding the tool set that can be used here. So for our demo, this is the scenario. You have Barbara, who is in the finance department. She received a malicious email, a spear phishing email with a weaponized document. She clicked on that document, the document downloaded, it ran some PowerShell commands. Mimikat credentials were stolen. There was some reconnaissance done for other accounts, other machines. Command and control communication was set up. Another user account was compromised as a result of this reconnaissance. This guy, Eric, his privileged account, so he's a help desk person, his privileged account is compromised. And because of that, because of the privileges he has maybe across all the machines on the network as a help desk admin, another machine was compromised, Roberto. And Roberto is a global system admin. And so once they compromised his account or his computer and then compromised his account, really at that point it was kind of game over, because at that point the attacker was able to dump the NTDS DIT. They were able to get the credentials for anything that they needed, and they began the process of exfiltrating using some inbox forwarding rules. So this attack timeline and scenario is not at all uncommon in the enterprise environments that we work in. The challenge is the signals are all over the place, right? The signals come from your email. They come from maybe an endpoint where a document is downloaded, where Mimikatz runs. You've got some signals for compromised identities. You've got signals for exfiltration of data. So all these signals can be coming from different systems, different tools. The question is, can we correlate them back to a single attack and then take some action on that? So let's hunt. So the first thing we're going to do, we're putting ourselves in the position of the SecOps team. We're going to begin by reviewing the different alerts. So this is typical of their day. They look at each alert separately in a different portal. And standing alone, the alerts don't seem to be related to the same attack story. The first thing that we look at here, we start with Defender for Office 365. And in this case, we see an alert that says email messages containing malware were removed after delivery. Now, in some cases, malware through an attachment or a phishing URL will get delivered to a recipient's inbox before Office 365 has a chance to detect it. And so alerts like that or events like that will show up as you see here. What happens is Office 365 will remove the infected messages from Office 365 mailboxes using what we call zero-hour auto purge, zero-hour auto purge, or ZAP. And with any subsequent recipients of that same file type, or that same piece of malware, the malware gets zapped before delivery. So these kind of alerts are not at all uncommon in large organizations, and they show that sometimes files do have the ability to slip through the cracks. Let's go to the Defender ATP portal. So moving on to an endpoint alert, we find a possible credential theft from the NTDS-DIT. Now, those of you that are familiar with Windows, you know that the NTDS-DIT file is the heart of Active Directory. It is the Active Directory database. It stores all the Active Directory information, which includes password hashes. So if an attacker is able to acquire this file, they can gather information about all the users in the domain and steal their credentials. With that credential information, they can then elevate their privileges in order to reach whatever asset they're after. Okay, so we know that's not good. We now move over to Cloud App Security, which is our cloud access security broker tool. So we're, as the security operations team, we're reviewing this, this alert that came from Azure Active Directory. It shows that there was a suspected overpass the hash attack. So an overpass the hash attack is a lateral movement technique where an attacker will steal an NTLM hash and create a forged Kerberos ticket from it in order to gain the permissions of a more privileged user. So we can see that happening here in this, this particular event. We see that Annette's credentials were stolen and they were used to authenticate directly into a PC. Moving on to the incident alerts. Now we switch over to the security portal and we can see that all these different alerts that we've just been talking about are actually linked. And they're part of the same incident in Microsoft 365 security. So the SecOps team can see that the three alerts that they just looked at in three different portals are correlated into the same incident. They're all part of the same larger attack. So here in the Alerts tab, the SecOps team gets a detailed chronological timeline of all the alerts that were involved in this incident. And what M365 is doing here is connecting the dots and giving context for all these individual alerts. So notice, for example, I see this this alert: email messages containing malware removed after delivery. So we saw that earlier, didn't we? Scroll down. Notice I've also got one here, possible credential theft from NTDS DIT. We saw that back here under the Defender for ATP section. If I scroll over to the right, the tools that were able to correlate these different alerts came from different products, and we can see that here. The different service sources show Cloud App Security as well as Defender ATP. And if we look further into this, would also see Azure for Identity, ATP, and so on. So what we'd like to do now is understand how these alerts all got correlated and start investigating this incident. So let's go ahead and close these individual portals and just use the one single one. So this incident that we're looking at represents the entire attack across all of the Microsoft products that were involved. So we're looking at a single incident with multiple alerts. So the incident, think of it as the story, and these are the chapters in the story. Okay, so let's go to the summary. So if we start with the summary tab here, this is where we get the ability to start making some informed triage decisions. It also allows us to track progress on remediating the threat and restoring our assets to a healthy state. Now, the first thing that we see here, the one that stands out the most, is an indication of progression against the MITRE attack framework. So it shows how far along the attacker has progressed in the MITRE attack, different TTPs. I also see here the scope of the attack. So I see that there were 5 devices that were impacted. I see 3 impacted users, Barbara Rotambu and Eric Gubbles. And I also see a mailbox that was part of the overall attack. We have this summarized view of all the impacted entities. We see their risk level based on the type of device or type of user they are. We see things like the tags that are associated with different devices or different user groups. So there's some device groups that have a high sensitivity of data, high risk users, and so on. Scroll down a little bit. So the alerts timeline over here on the left shows how the attack has progressed through the environment. So Microsoft 365 has been able to automatically correlate over 15 different events from different sources to intelligently bring them together as a single incident. So let's click on this view alerts. So the SecOps team can now see that Microsoft Defender for Endpoint has identified some malware that was delivered by Outlook, right? So we see this, a malicious file was detected based on indication provided by Office 365. So let's take a look at that. When you dig into this alert, you can get more information about that individual alert. So what happens here is as alerts are triggered, so when an alert like this comes in, there are security playbooks that go into effect. So security playbooks are back-end policies that are at the heart of the automation in Microsoft 365 Defender. So when this happens, a security playbook is launched automatically when specific alerts are triggered within your organization. Once that alert triggers, that playbook is run by the automated investigation and response system. The investigation will look at all the associated metadata of the alert, including things like the email message, the user, the devices that are involved, and so on. And then based on what it is able to find when it runs the playbook, the automated investigation can take a set of actions automatically or can recommend a set of actions that your security team could take to control and mitigate the threat. It just depends on how you configure it. All right, let's go to investigations. Now, as I mentioned, there are automated investigations that get kicked off. So when we click in the investigations tab, we can see all the automated investigations that are associated with this one incident, right? So we're still in the same incident. We're just looking at the comprehensive view of everything that took place. So this allows our SecOps team to quickly review the investigations that were performed, what alerts triggered them. Will they be able to see what their status is, whether the threat was able to be remediated or not, and where the alert came from, whether it's Office or Azure, ATP, or whatever, the entities that were involved, how long the investigation took. And so what we want to do first is take a look at the investigation graph of this first one. A malicious file was detected based on the indication by Office 365. So the investigation graph here shows them that there was an alert triggered following a signal from Office 365 of a potential issue within a file that arrived into a user's Outlook mailbox. So Defender then analyzed all the files on that individual's device on Barbara MPC. It identified a malicious file and remediated it, right? So it looked at services, drivers, IP addresses, and so on, and it found one that needed to be fixed. So Barbara's PC is set at what we call the fully automated remediation level. And so if it finds something that needs to be fixed, it will automatically do that. Let's go to the Devices tab. Now, when we go into the Devices tab, we get even more detailed information about the endpoint itself. So if we want to get more information about Barbara's PC, we click on it, and over here on the device, the side pane here, we see some relevant details about Barbara's device that might be useful during our investigation. So we get information like what OS is she running, including what build, what domain is she a part of, what is the health state of the device, what is the data sensitivity on the device. So clearly we see here that the device has been marked as having highly confidential data on it. So that's a concern for the security operations team. Let's scroll down a little bit and get some more information. So here we see the alerts that are taking place on the machine. And importantly, what we see here is the users that have logged on to this machine. So primarily, we see that Barbara has logged on to the machine, but we also see a person named Eric Doubles who has logged on to this machine as well. So since the malware was introduced through email, it's possible that this email has also been received by other users and possibly infected other devices. So what we want to do is take a step back to look at other investigations related to this incident. So let's go back to the root of the incident. And let's go to the alerts. And what we want to do is go into this email messages containing malware removed after delivery. All right, so we've got an overview of the alert, and we see here that there were some mailboxes where malware was removed after delivery. So maybe those machines were compromised as well. To get more information about this event, let's take a look at the investigations. So the SecOps team takes a closer look at the investigations that were performed. And what we want to do is look at the second investigation, mail with malware is zapped. So what we want to do is dig a little bit deeper into this investigation and what took place. So let's click here, the event ID or the investigation ID. And if we go to the alerts, malware alert. All right. So in here, what we see is that one of the user mailboxes that was impacted is that of Barbara Morell. And so this gives us an indication that she's one of the impacted users. So let's go ahead and close this. If we switch over to the email tab of the same investigation, here the SecOps team gets a high-level overview of the large picture of all the mail that was zapped in this investigation. So the tool is looking at the clustering of email that was part of the broader attack. So we group the mail according to things like the file hashes of the attachment, the sending domain, juno.com, the sending IP address, and so on, different characteristics of the email that was zapped. And at the bottom here, we see email received by user Barbara Morell. So let's click on that. And now we see that the alert was included in this incident because it impacted that same user mailbox, right? It impacted Barbara Morell at mtpdemos.net. All right. So from this screen, we can also get some information about the type of threats that were identified or that were tagged to these emails, what the disposition of the email was. Was it marked as malware, as phishing email? Was it sent to junk? Was it blocked, right? So we get a lot of information about this cluster of emails that was treated with the Zap tool. All right, so we now know based on our incident that the malware didn't stop just at a single mailbox. So we want to get some more information about what else took place. So let's go over to the alerts tab. Scroll down a little bit. Now, if we look at the third line from the top here, we can now see that the attacker enumerated information about users that recently had a session open to the domain controller using SMB. So let's take a look at that. Now, when we click into this, the SecOps team gets a quick overview of the alert itself. And so we can see how this got correlated into the broader event. Why? Well, because if we start digging into it in the alert description, we see Barbara and her PC showing up as having enumerated those sessions. So that's kind of interesting. Let's go and look at the alert page. Now notice we switched over to another portal. We switched over to the Cloud App Security portal, but we're still just looking at the same event or the same alert. And here we can see that the attacker was inside the network. They got initial access to Barbara's PC. That's where they enumerated the SMB sessions to the domain controller. If we go under here, we see SMB session enumeration details. We click on that. We see that Barbara Moreland on this IP address was exposed through MTP air DC01. So that's domain controller. So we'd like to get more information about Barbara, who she is, what other activities she might be involved in. So let's close this. And we'll go over to the users tab for right now. All right, so here we have the users that are involved in our same incident. Okay, so we have Barbara, so let's click on Barbara. And immediately we can see what her title is, what department she's a member of. And if I open the user page, we can get even more details about her. Now, here we've got some more information about Barbara that may be useful. So we see her investigation priority score, which is pretty significant. We see the alerts that she's associated with, 270 alerts, and we see the different alerts and risky activities that have contributed to that score. So we see things like a skeleton key attack, encryption downgrade, mass deletion of files, remote code execution attempt. So that doesn't sound like an accountant doing things. That sounds like an attacker, right? So we can also see over here your exposure. So how many devices she's been associated with, how many resources, how many locations. Right? So now let's go over here and scroll down a little bit. And we get some more detailed contact information for Barbara if we need to get in touch with her and find out, is this activity from an infrequent country a legitimate alert, or were you actually in, Mozambique yesterday, wherever it was. Let's scroll back up. If we dig deeper, like I said, we have the priority score, and then we also see where she stands in terms of the entire organization and the trend over the last 14 days. So we can see that she is near the top 90% in the organization, meaning she is a highly prioritized user to investigate. And that investigation priority is built based on the alerts and the risky activities that are associated with her user accounts, and that we can see here in the timeline. So for each alert and activity, by selecting its score here, okay, we can view the evidence and why the alert or activity is suspicious and got scored the way it did. So we could dig into each one of these if we wanted to. But what we're going to do here is close this for right now. Now from this user pane, we can now select Go Hunt, which will move us over to the advanced hunting portal, where we will have a pre-populated query that will help us to hunt for the related activities about Barbara on the network. So this pre-populated query is populated with the elements and the details that we're looking at right now. And this is allowing us to pull this information from all the security telemetry that Microsoft 365 knows. So let's click on Go Hunt. So it's going to take us into the hunting portal. And there's really two purposes, or two different use cases for this type of hunting. We can either have an investigation that starts from an ongoing investigation, like we are doing right now, or we might have a hypothesis-driven investigation where we think that something looks suspicious and we want to maybe get more details about it. The tool uses KQL, or Kusto query language. It's a powerful language that lets you hunt over tons of records in no time at all. This is the same query language that's used across things like log analytics in Azure, Azure Sentinel, or cloud-based SIEM, as well as Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So we've got this query that's been pre-built. Notice it's got Barbara Moreland's information. It's got information about, it's looking for account names, it's looking for SIDs, looking for different timestamps and so on. So the SecOps team can use this query to hunt over telemetry data that originated from Office 365, including things like email transactions, as well as device telemetry from the endpoints and even things like identity information out of Cloud App Security. So in this case, I don't need all this data in the query, so I'll remove some of it. So I've just got this this little bit remaining, and so I'm going to run this simpler query. And what we're going to see is a change down here when I click on this. Okay, so under Barbara's activities, we see some interesting queries. We see a query for the group domain admins, right? We also see queries on the user Eric Doubles. And so these are kind of interesting investigations that are taking place, and want to understand why that's happening. So probably after acquiring the IP address through that SMB session enumeration, the attacker was trying to get more information about users that were part of the domain admins group. Now, if I wanted to inspect one of these records, I could select one of them, and then I would see a flyout that would provide me with detailed information about that individual alert. So now we know that the SecOps engineering team understands that the attacker recognized Roberto is a domain admin, right? They were able to query and identify who the members of the domain admins group is. Eric, they queried the user, and he is a member of the help desk and probably has higher credentials than most standard users. So we'll go back to the incident to investigate the lateral movement attempts that were made to compromise these privileged accounts. All right, so we go back to the incident and to the alerts tab. And what we want to see is how the attacker tried to gain credentials for more privileged users and begin some lateral movement. So down here, about the middle, we see user and IP address reconnaissance with SMB. So the SecOps engineering team can see also, along with this, different credential theft alerts originating from Barbara's PC. So there's one here, and we also see one here, suspected credential theft activity that took place on Barbara's PC. So let's take a look at that. We can also conclude that all the users who logged into Barbara's PC have been compromised, right? So her machine was compromised, and so therefore any user who had logged in and had cached credentials on that machine would also have been compromised. Now, earlier when we looked at Barbara's PC, we saw that Eric and Barbara had both logged into this device. So the conclusion we can draw is that not only is Barbara compromised, but Eric is as well. Let's go to the users tab. So let's take a look at Eric, see what's going on with him. When we go to the user tab, we see here that Eric is a member of the help desk team or the information technology department. He's a help desk supervisor. So since he is a member of the help desk team, he's probably a local admin on Barbara's PC and probably on a lot more devices. It also helps explain the alerts that are related to Roberto's device. The attacker used Eric's account to access Roberto's machine in order to get the domain admin credentials. Now notice our first alert here describes a suspected overpass the hash attack. Okay, so what we want to do is investigate that particular alert. And we don't see the suspected overpass the hash attack here. So we'll scroll over to the next page. And there we go. There's our suspected overpass the hash attack. And here's a description of the attack. We see that Roberto's account on his machine was successfully authenticated against the domain controller. And what do we see here? His credentials were used to authenticate to the domain controller, and then we see some activity taking place, credential theft. Scrolling down, we see the top impacted entities. So let's take a look at what entities here were impacted. So here we see his PC and his user account were suspected, or were impacted rather. Go ahead and close this. Let's go back to the first page. Scroll down. Now, there's a couple alerts here that the SecOps team sees that are likely related to the overpass the hash attack. We see, for example, a suspicious LSAS process being accessed, and we also see a successful login using potentially stolen credentials. Right? Let's scroll over. And the attack that was performed using stolen credentials was triggered by Microsoft Defender, ATP, because we see that it's the detection source, right, or the service source. So this is one of the important functionalities that Defender provides, automatically detecting these sort of anomalies, these lateral movement type of attacks. Now we have this other one, this suspicious LSAS process access. So let's take a look at that. Now, this alert was triggered due to the first identity alert related to the overpass the hash attack, and that it was enriched with more data and activities that were observed on the same device. So the other process or logon activities. So this enrichment helped to combine all the related activities and alerts into this single incident. Right? Scroll down. So with the domain admin credentials from Roberto, the attacker was then able to begin moving laterally to the domain controller using this overpass the hash and get a Kerberos ticket. And they were able to authenticate to network resources. We can get deeper into the attack by looking at the possible credential theft from NTDS-DIT. So what we see happening here is the attacker dumped the NTDS-DIT in order to obtain the user credentials that are stored on a domain controller. And so we are now aware that Roberto's account was used to dump the directory services data from the domain controller that is, I can't remember the name of it, Air MTP, MTP Air DC01. There it is up there. Scroll down a little bit. We also see again the impacted assets. You see the domain controllers, and now we see the network service account being used, right? So they're connecting over the network for this. Let's go ahead and close this. We also notice down here at the bottom that there are several suspicious inbox forwarding rules. So these alerts were generated, as you can see over here, by Microsoft Cloud App Security. So let's take a look at the first one here. Now, creating a mailbox forwarding rule is a common method for attackers to gather and exfiltrate information about the environment, its users, without the compromised user being aware of the activity. So the SecOps team can see at the top right up here that this alert is still part of the same incident that we've been investigating all along. And we can go in here and see that there's a broader view of activities that Barbara was involved in on the network. So we see that there was a user added to a group in SharePoint. Barbara's user account was used to create a forwarding inbox rule. So maybe they're authenticating to SharePoint and exfiltrating data from SharePoint using Barbara's Exchange mailbox. So now we kind of have an idea of what the attacker is actually doing. Okay, so now we have a broad idea of what's taking place. Let's go to the Action Center and see what we can do about it. So the Action Center shows us a list of pending actions that we can act on and respond to that are related to different security alerts. So again, it's an aggregated view of multiple sources from the M365 suite of security solutions that allows you to take proactive action against alerts. So let's go to the History tab. I now want to filter my events. So I'm going to say not just the past week, but we'll say the last 6 months. I want to get not 30 items, but 100. And I want to click filters. So I'm going to go up. I click on quarantine file. Okay, so this quarantine file action that I just selected here, this is going to show me the details of any files that were automatically remediated. There's also a detailed report that shows what kind of malware the file contains that required this remediation. Apply. Scroll down a little bit. And I want to see what files were quarantined that were on the domain controller. Now, so we filtered through these files. Notice some of the files that have been quarantined here. We see down here at the bottom, we see Mimikatz was quarantined. We also see some PowerShell scripts. So we see Power Up, we see this Power View, and we see another one, Invoke Token, blah, 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 that was quarantined. All these indicate that there's some bad news going on here. So this one's called Invoke Token Manipulations, so the attacker isn't terribly secretive about what they're doing, but let's go going on. So at the top of the event here, we can open the automatic investigation page if we wanted to get more insight on the alert. We would also be able to approve or reject any suggested actions related to quarantining the file. In this case, the file's already been automatically remediated. As you can see, the file was quarantined successfully. Scroll down here. Now, if I felt that this quarantine was performed in error, and if I had the permissions, I could go in and actually undo the remediation, right? Now let me clear the filters. Now what I want to do next is look for the action stop process. So I want to see instances where something was done that stopped a process. And so here I see a number of instances where Notepad was stopped, right? So that seems unusual that Notepad was stopped so many times from running. Not that one. So in the action details, we see that somehow this Notepad application attempted to run some PowerShell code. So this isn't terribly unusual. We see often instances where an attacker will try to hide their activity within a well-known executable or something like that so that it doesn't get detected. Scroll down a little bit. So we can review the details of the alert, which include the incident that it's associated with. which security service source detected the file, what MITRE attack technique or category this is in, right? So we get information about where this fits in the MITRE attack framework. And so we want to take a deeper dive into what we can actually identify within these different alerts and incidents beyond the ones that were automatically surfaced with the hunting tool. So let's go over to the hunting tab. Click Advanced Hunting. And we're going to click on Get Started. Okay, so in the Get Started tab, we've got some information here. On the right-hand side, we've got the broader schema of how to structure a query. And I have the ability here to save queries or to share them with others. So under shared queries, I'm going to click on my saved queries. And I've got one here, MTP demo, outside email. So based on the SecOps team has created this query that looks for the following type of attack scenario. It's going to look for an email that originates outside the organization. Shortly after the email is received, it uses a technique to steal credentials from the end user. Once the end user takes that bait, then the attacker performs a logon to Microsoft Online Services, maybe SharePoint or OneDrive. And then once that logon is performed, maybe the attacker downloads some files from the company SharePoint. So we created this query that shows that type of behavior. Okay? So let's click on Run Query now and see what we end up with. So we've got 3 occurrences down here at the bottom. Let's click on the first one. So here I can inspect the actual event that took place, when this email was received, what the subject line of that email was, who the recipients were, and so on. So I see that a similar behavior to what happened with Barbara also occurred with Annette Hill. Okay. What is that? So we're going to take a section of this query and insert the indicator of compromise that identifies this actor to create a custom detection, so that the SecOps team knows when this actor is back on the network. So the indicator of compromise that they'll use is the domain that the actor sent the email from. This is, in this case, juno.com. So basically, this allows the query to run in the background and create an alert when the same type of activity happens again. That's what we're trying to create, is look for this behavior in the future. Okay. So delete that. And now we're going to create a detection rule based on what's left here. So we're going to name it bad email to endpoint. Select a frequency of every 3 hours we want this query to run. Going to include an alert title of bad email to endpoint again. Things simple. Severity, we're not going to mark it as high, we'll just mark it as medium. Category, so category, here's where we can get more specific about what type of techniques are being used from a MITRE standpoint. And we're going to say that this is a spear phishing attachment. And we'll say bad email to endpoint. Okay. Next. Mailbox. So we're looking for this to occur in a mailbox. We're going to look for instances where the recipient email address is the indicator. So, like the alerts, this advanced hunting tool provides a consolidated view of activities, both on-prem and cloud data sources. So we can run these queries against on-premise machines as well as cloud machines. Okay. So now the SecOps team has a hunting query that runs every 3 hours. It's looking for the type of compromise that they were able to identify through the events in the incident that we've been investigating. And so if those same indicators of compromise show up again, they'll get an alert on it and they can take action on it. Let's go back to the home page. So in the demo, what you've seen is an example of how complex the job is for a modern security operations center that has to battle like our modern day attacks. So the industry as a whole has really struggled to win this battle, but it is possible to turn the tide to a certain degree, right? The current class of security solutions, not just Microsoft, but many of them, can do a better job of stopping and even preventing the spread of attacks by looking at the entire security stack as a living organism, not just focusing on an individual endpoint or mailboxes or identity in isolation. We have to look at the whole thing as a single attackable organism. So we have to force a shift by moving from a model of reactive detection to one of proactive protection. We can't leave security teams to manually go through the process of coordinating these signals across different domains and different services to fully understand the breadth of the attack and how to stop it. There just isn't enough time, and there's not enough resources for people to do that type of thing because the attacks are evolving constantly. Threat protection that changes our approach to attacks requires built-in intelligence, like you saw here, the ability for the tool itself to correlate the signals and understand how the attacker got in, how they spread from one service to the other, and that also has the ability to automatically heal compromised assets. So I hope this has been valuable for you. I hope you're able to learn something about some of the tools that are available in Microsoft 365 to do this endpoint threat detection and hunting. And feel free to contact me at any of the contact information that's listed there. And thank you very much for your attention.
Great job, David. Thank you very much for taking the time to do the presentation. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them into the chats anywhere or send them to me. David was unavailable to do the Q&A after his talk. So if you type in the chat or anything like that, I will make sure that he gets the questions and I'll get the answers back to you.